up until my 40th birthday, was a blueprint I had followed to perfection. As an architect, I believe in structure, in solid foundations, in predictable outcomes. And my life was my greatest design. A successful career, a loving wife, Leah, who knew me better than I knew myself, and a smart, funny 10-year-old son, Leo. We lived in a house I had designed myself, a clean, minimalist space of glass and cedar where everything had its place. My relationship with my father, Victor, was another cornerstone of that life. He was a man built of quiet integrity, a retired professor who taught me the value of honor and a good name. For my birthday, he gave me a vintage Omega watch, a symbol of stability, of time marching forward in an orderly fashion. My life was a well-built house. I had no reason to believe there were any cracks in the foundation. The gift from Leo was meant as a joke. Tucked among the more serious presents was a sleek, brightly colored box containing a DNA test kit. For the man who has everything, she laughed. Now we can find out if you really have Viking blood like you claim. It was a novelty, a piece of Silicon Valley curiosity. We joked about it. I spit into the plastic tube, sealed the biohazard bag with a sense of mild absurdity, and dropped it in the mail the next day. And then I completely forgot about it. Life went on with its comfortable, predictable rhythm. I worked on a new commercial building design, helped Leo with his math homework, had quiet dinners with Leah. The DNA test was a forgotten punchline to a birthday party. For weeks later, an email popped up in my inbox. Subject: your DNA results are in. I clicked on it with mild amusement during a coffee break. I scrolled past the ancestry chart, a predictable mix of Northern European heritage, nothing exciting. I was about to close the window when I saw a tab labeled DNA relatives. Curious, I clicked it expecting to see a list of third or fourth cousins from Ohio or Pennsylvania. But at the very top of the list, under a banner that read Close Family, was a name I had never seen before. Kate Volkov. And next to the name, 2 words that made the coffee in my stomach turn to ice. Half-sister. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process the information. It was like looking at a structural analysis where a supporting column was simply missing. It was an error, an impossibility. Half-sister. My father was a man of unshakable principle. My mother, God rest her soul, had been his wife for 45 years. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was solid. There were no secrets. There were no hidden rooms or forgotten wings in the house of my life. I was sure of it. It had to be a mistake, a glitch in their algorithm, a clerical error. But as I sat there in the quiet of my perfectly designed office, staring at that unfamiliar name, a cold tendril of fear began to unwind in my gut. The name wasn't just text on a screen. It felt like a crack appearing in a load-bearing wall. It was the first quiet tremor of the earthquake that was about to bring my entire world crashing down. For 2 days, I did nothing. I told myself it was a scam, a data error. I tried to bury the information under blueprints and project deadlines, but it was no use. The name Kate Volkov was a splinter in my mind. The thought of a sister, a whole other life that had run parallel to mine in secret, was an itch I couldn't scratch. Finally, I showed Leah. I expected her to be as skeptical as I was, but she looked at the screen with a deep, thoughtful empathy that was so characteristic of her. "What if it's real, Max?" she said softly. "What if there's a woman out there who has gone through her whole life feeling like a piece of her was missing? Don't you think you owe it to her, and to yourself, to find out?" She was right. My fear was selfish. With a knot in my stomach, I clicked the message button next to Kate's name. I wrote a short, cautious message. "My name is Max. This is going to sound crazy, but this site says we might be related. I don't know if this is a mistake, but I felt I should reach out." Her reply came within the hour. It was just as hesitant, just as shocked. We exchanged a few more tentative messages before agreeing to meet for coffee. The woman who walked into the quiet coffee shop was not what I expected. She was petite, with intelligent, kind eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of sadness. There was a warmth to her smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She was charming, but in a fragile, vulnerable way. Her story came out slowly, hesitantly, as if she were afraid of judging or being judged. Her mother had met our father, Victor, 40 years ago when he was on a long-term engineering assignment in her city, hundreds of miles from our home. He was charismatic, powerful, and married. He promised her mother the world, a future, a life together. Then, one day, his project ended and he was simply gone. No goodbye, no letter. He vanished from her life, leaving her pregnant and alone. She never spoke ill of him, Kate said, stirring her untouched latte. She just said he belonged to another life. We never had much money. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and she died of cancer a few years ago. I did the test out of, I don't know, a foolish hope. I just wanted to see a piece of the puzzle, a name, a face. I never, ever expected to find a brother. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't my sin, but it was my father's, and I was the living embodiment of the life she was denied. The perfect house, the stable family, the father who had been present for every birthday and baseball game. All of it was built on a foundation of her mother's silent heartbreak. I knew in that moment what I had to do. I introduced Kate to Leah and Leo the following Sunday. She charmed them instantly. She didn't arrive empty-handed, but brought a thoughtful book on modern art for me and a complex Lego set for Leo that he was instantly obsessed with. She talked to Leah about teaching, listened intently, and asked all the right questions. She wasn't an intruder. She fit into the empty spaces of our family like she was always meant to be there. In the weeks that followed, Aunt Kate became a beloved fixture in our home. She'd help Leo with his science projects, have long talks with Leah on the patio, and even offer me surprisingly insightful critiques of my design work. She was the sister Leah never had, and the cool, fun Aunt Leo adored. The hole in our family I never knew existed was now filled. We talked about telling our father, but Kate was adamant. Please, Max, not yet, she'd said, her eyes full of concern. He's an old man. What good would it do to dredge all this up and cause him pain? Let's just let this be our secret for now. For his sake. It sounded so noble, so selfless. I readily agreed. I was protecting my father from the shock and my newfound sister from potential rejection. For the first time since that email had landed in my inbox, the crack in my world felt like it was healing. It felt like I was balancing the scales, making things right. I didn't realize I wasn't patching the foundation. I was inviting the demolition crew right through the front door. For a couple of months, our new, expanded family felt like a miracle. Kate became a permanent fixture in our lives, a source of light and laughter. We celebrated her birthday as if we'd been doing it for years. I felt like I had righted a historical wrong, that I had finally balanced the scales for my father's past transgressions. My perfect, well-ordered life had simply expanded to include one more person. The first crack appeared at work. I was on the verge of landing the biggest contract of my career, a new municipal library. It was a project I had poured my soul into for almost a year. The final presentation was on a Friday. On the Wednesday before, Kate came over for dinner. She saw me hunched over my laptop in my home office, looking stressed. You look like you're about to snap, she said, placing a cup of coffee on my desk. That's my new portfolio, I explained, with the final library renderings. The files are huge. My computer keeps lagging. Let me see, she said, pulling up a chair. She handed me a USB stick. Speaking of portfolios, I digitized some of our mom's old photos. You should see them. I plugged the stick into my computer. We spent a few minutes looking at grainy black and white photos of a woman I'd never met and the sister I was just getting to know. It was a nice moment. On Friday morning, I walked into the conference room, confident and prepared. I plugged my laptop into the projector, and then I opened the folder. It was empty. Not just the presentation files, everything. My entire portfolio, years of work, was gone. A single ominous error message popped up, files corrupted. Data is unrecoverable. I lost the contract. My reputation took a massive hit. When I told Kate, she was heartbroken for me. Oh, Max, it must have been that USB stick. It was so old, it must have had a virus on it. This is all my fault. She was so distraught that I found myself comforting her, telling her it was a freak accident, that it could have happened to anyone. The stress from work began to bleed into my home life. I was short-tempered, distant. Leah tried to be patient, but there was a new tension between us. This was where Kate made her next move. She took Leah out for lunch, a sisters-in-law spa day to help her de-stress. Later that week, Leah confronted me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice trembling. "I need to ask you something, Max. And I need you to be honest with me. Are you happy?" I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I am." "Then why," she said, her voice cracking, "did you tell your sister that you almost didn't marry me because you were still in love with Sarah from college?" The accusation came so far out of left field, I couldn't even process it. Sarah was a meaningless college fling from 20 years ago. I'd barely remembered her. The fight was explosive. I accused her of being crazy. She accused me of being a liar. It was the worst fight of our marriage. It was only later, after we were sleeping in separate rooms, that Kate called me, crying. "Max, I am so sorry," she sobbed. "We were just talking about old flames, and I mentioned you'd once told me a story about a college girlfriend. I think Leah must have misunderstood. I've ruined everything." Her apology was so full of anguish, it was impossible to be angry with her. She was just trying to help. The final blow was financial. After losing the library contract, our savings took a hit. I was worried, and I confided in Kate. A week later, she came to me, her eyes shining with excitement. "Max, I have the answer," she said, showing me a slick website on her phone. It was a new tech startup, an eco-investment fund. My friend from my old job is an early investor. It's a sure thing. She said they're about to get a massive new round of funding. This could fix everything for you. I was desperate. My judgment was clouded by stress and fear. Against Leah's better judgment, I took a significant portion of our remaining savings and invested it. For a month, it looked like a brilliant move. The numbers on the website went up every day. Then, one Monday morning, the website was gone. A quick search revealed the truth. The company was a phantom, a sophisticated online scam. The money had vanished without a trace. When I called Kate to tell her, she was already sobbing. "They got me too, Max," she cried. "I put in even more than you did. I feel so stupid. I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. My world was in ruins. My career was damaged, my marriage was a cold war, and now we were financially crippled." Through it all, Kate was my rock. She was the one who sat with me in the dark, who listened to my fears, who told me we would get through this together. As I sat there amidst the wreckage of my life, I remember thinking that I couldn't have survived the last few months without my sister. The irony is so thick it chokes me to even think about it now. She wasn't the person helping me through the storm. She was the storm. I was at rock bottom. My life was a smoldering ruin, and the only person who seemed to understand, the only person I could talk to without feeling judged, was Kate. She'd call every day, offering encouragement, telling me I was strong, that we would find a way through it. She was my lifeline. The person who cut that line wasn't me. It was Leah. She had been quiet and distant for weeks, and I thought she was pulling away for good. But she wasn't retreating, she was observing. One evening, she sat down next to me on the couch, her face pale but her eyes clear and focused. "Max," she said, her voice steady, "this is going to sound crazy, but I've been going over everything. Every single thing that has gone wrong in the last 3 months." She laid it out like a prosecutor. "The project files get corrupted the one night Kate uses your computer. Our marriage falls apart after she accidentally tells me a story about your ex-girlfriend. We lose our savings on an investment she brought to us where she also lost money. Doesn't any part of that seem strange to you?" I started to defend her, the words automatic on my lips. "She's a victim too, Leah. She's been nothing but supportive. Has she?" Leah pressed, her voice gaining an edge. "Or has she been at the scene of every single crime? Her friend, who also lost money in that scam? I found her on Instagram. She's been on a yacht in Greece for the last 2 weeks. She doesn't look like someone who just lost her life savings." The world tilted. Leah's logic was cold, hard, and undeniable. It was a single, solid fact in a sea of chaos. The supportive phone calls, the sympathetic tears, the endless bad luck. It all clicked into place with a horrifying snap. We became a team again, united by a terrible suspicion. We needed proof. I still had the name of Kate's mother and her hometown from our initial research. It wasn't hard to find a public records database online. We started digging. It didn't take long. The story unraveled in a series of cold, hard facts on a computer screen. First, we found her mother's obituary. She hadn't died in poverty. She had remarried a wealthy local businessman 10 years after Kate was born. We found school records. Kate hadn't gone to a local public school. She'd attended a prestigious and very expensive private academy. The final piece came from a digitized archive of old court documents. It was a fraud lawsuit filed 40 years ago. The plaintiff, Kate's mother. The defendant, Victor, my father. The details were laid out in dry, legal language that told a story of utter devastation. He had seduced her, convinced her to liquidate her late husband's assets to fund their joint venture, and then vanished with every cent, leaving her pregnant and destitute. The case had been dismissed. He had disappeared too, completely. I felt the air leave my lungs. Her entire life story was a lie. A carefully constructed, weaponized lie. I called her. My voice was eerily calm. Kate, can you come over? We need to talk. She arrived 20 minutes later, her face a mask of gentle concern. Max, you sounded so serious on the phone. Is everything okay? I didn't answer. I just pointed to the coffee table, where I had printed out the court documents. She looked down at the papers and then back up at me, and the mask fell. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, flat, diamond-hard clarity. The vulnerable, loving sister was gone. In her place was a stranger. So you found out, she said. Her voice was different, too. All the soft, hesitant tones were gone, replaced by a crisp, intelligent precision. Why? I choked out. The lies, everything. She almost laughed, a dry, mirthless sound. Why? You grew up with a father you adored, a man of integrity. My mother died believing she was a fool who had been tricked out of her future. You got the house, the family, the name. I got the consequences of his actions. She stood up, pacing slowly in front of the fireplace. You have to understand, Max. This was never about you. You, your job, your pretty wife, you were just the tools, the materials. I wanted to see if I could be an architect, too. Could I take a life as perfectly structured as yours and find the load-bearing walls? Could I place the charges just right? It turns out I could. She stopped and looked at me, her expression not hateful, but chillingly neutral, like a scientist observing a finished experiment. I didn't want to destroy you, she said. I wanted him to watch. I wanted our father, in his comfortable retirement, to see his perfect legacy, his perfect son's perfect life, burned to the ground. I wanted him to feel the same helpless agony my mother felt. And you, my dear brother, you were the theater where I staged my little play. She walked to the front door, pausing with her hand on the knob. She hadn't raised her voice once. There was no villainous monologue, just the quiet, patient recitation of a 40-year-old debt finally being paid. It's over now, she said. Then she opened the door and walked out, leaving me alone in the wreckage she had so carefully designed. After she closed the door behind her, an absolute silence descended on the house. It was heavier and more profound than any silence I had ever known. The air itself felt different, thin and sharp. I sat there for an hour, maybe two, just staring at the court documents on the coffee table. The whole world had been tilted on its axis, and every memory, every piece of my life was sliding into a new, horrifying alignment. The corrupted files weren't a virus, they were a deliberate deletion. The fight with Leah wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a targeted strike. The investment wasn't bad luck, it was a carefully planned execution. Kate hadn't been a supportive sister. She had been the architect of my ruin. When Leah came home, she found me sitting in the exact same spot. I didn't have to say much. She saw the look on my face, she saw the papers on the table, and she knew. We spent that night talking for the first time in months with a raw and brutal honesty. We laid all the pieces out, and the sheer, meticulous evil of Kate's plan was staggering. The chasm between us was still there, but for the first time, we were looking across it at each other instead of turning our backs. The next day, I tried to call Kate's number. It was, of course, disconnected. She had vanished as completely and suddenly as she had appeared. There was one last thing I had to do. I drove to my father's house, the quiet, respectable home where I grew up, the place that had always been a symbol of stability for me. He was in his garden, trimming his rose bushes, the picture of peaceful retirement. He smiled when he saw me. Max, what a pleasant surprise. We sat in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and photos of a happy, perfect family. I didn't know how to start, so I just laid it out. Dad, I said, my voice flat and empty, I need to ask you about a woman you knew 40 years ago. Her name was Elena Volkov. The color drained from his face. The teacup he was holding rattled against its saucer. His entire body seemed to shrink in his armchair. And in that moment, before he said a word, I had my answer. He broke down, not with the quiet dignity I would have expected, but with the ugly, gasping sobs of a guilty child. He confessed everything. The affair, the seduction, the business scam, the theft. How he had taken every penny from a trusting woman and built his own comfortable life on her ruin, telling himself for 40 years that he was a good man who had just made a youthful mistake. I looked at the weeping old man in front of me, and I didn't recognize him. The man I had idolized, my moral compass, had died in that moment. This stranger was all that was left. I took off the vintage watch he had given me for my birthday and placed it on the table between us. I stood up and walked out of his house without saying another word. It's been a year. Leah and I are still together. We are in therapy, learning how to rebuild on fractured ground. The trust between us is fragile, a kintsugi bowl of repaired cracks. I'm working again, taking smaller projects, trying to restore my reputation. We didn't lose the house, but sometimes I walk through its rooms and feel like a ghost. I haven't spoken to my father since that day. He has called, he has written letters. I haven't opened them. Kate got her revenge. She was brilliant. She understood that the only way to truly hurt my father was not to expose him, but to poison his legacy, to pass the curse of his sin down to his son. I look at blueprints differently now. I don't just see lines, structures, and spaces. I see weak points. I see the potential for decay. I see the hidden, hollow rooms where secrets can fester and rot the entire foundation from within. My father's sin became my inheritance. I live in the house that I designed, but its foundation will never feel solid to me again.